Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with Carla Da Costa. Carla is an author on divorce and a divorce coach. She works with men and women who are separating or divorced through her private coaching practice, her online programs, and her books. Through her work, Carla supports and inspires individuals to make this next season of their life the best season of their life. Carla has become a modern voice on divorce, asking if divorce really is a failure or could this actually be the best thing that's ever happened to you. In this week's episode, expect to learn what people are looking for second time round, the struggles of many women in their first marriages, the importance of respect and appreciation, whether being the provider is all that important, who tends to outgrow who in marriages, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Carla Da Costa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I have no idea how I came across your work, but it was quite recent, and both of us been very interested in relationships, what's working, what's not. I am very interested in what you've got to say, and even a conversation that we had this week online, I'm interested in unpacking that as well. But for those that don't know of you or your work, can you give them a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Yes, so I am an author on love and divorce. I'm a divorce coach here in Australia. I work predominantly with women, but actually an increasingly growing amount of men. And I was life coaching back in 2016 when I happened to go through my own divorce. And so it's been an accidental transition into this niche. I ended up here simply because I couldn't find any positive content about divorce when I went through my own. Everything was very negative and very legalistic, and I didn't want to waste another second focusing on my ex or my marriage ending. I really wanted to look to the future. And at the time, there were no positive books out there about divorce and about divorce maybe being the best thing you could actually do for your life. And so the desire was to simply write a book about it. And as I started writing my book in 2020, my coaching niche sort of changed because of what I was sort of diving into in my content. And from the moment I changed my niche, owned that this was the space that I wanted to work in, my coaching has just taken off because there is and there was such a need for that at the time. So I've kind of changed the conversation around divorce for many people. And I know it's a bit of a controversial topic for some, divorce. It triggers a lot of people, but actually the work I do is incredibly fulfilling. I work with a lot of people that are in abusive marriages, toxic marriages, and even just marriages that are not love anymore, and they're staying out of pressure and expectation or fear. So while I might be working in the divorce space, actually my desire for my clients is simply to move them towards love. And the understanding is sometimes we have to leave a marriage first to get there.
What makes it controversial, the work? That pricked my ears when you said it's controversial. What makes it controversial, your work or this space?
Well, so many people are triggered by abandonment and rejection, or the fear that I may be abandoned, that I might be rejected. So that brings up many things for people that are in marriages and maybe trying to keep one together. And, generationally, we have grown up with the expectation that a marriage is meant to last forever, loyalty and commitment above all else. And so this get out of jail card that is now becoming more socially accepted around divorce, particularly when there doesn't have to be physical abuse or anything now for a marriage to end. It can simply be, I don't love you anymore, I'm not happy here anymore. Those kind of emotive words that can be very subjective. It brings up a lot for people that are married. So my previous profession was a dental hygienist. So there are many times when I go out socially and I can see that the crowd is married people, and I can sense very quickly the types of marriages that they're in based on the way they speak to their partners and the dynamics. So if I can feel that I'm in a crowd where many people are settling, and maybe, you know how some couples really sort of bag their partners out and complain about their partners a lot socially. If I'm sitting in a room full of people like that, I don't tell them I'm a divorce coach, because I don't want the flow-on effect into the conversation or the projection. On that night, I go back to being a dental hygienist. I joke I would rather hear about their root canal gone wrong than their divorce not working out for them, because it opens up so much triggers for people. And, you know, obviously work-wise, I love to talk about it with my clients, but socially, that's sort of like not what I want to be doing with people. And so it brings up a lot of people, because a lot of people don't want to be abandoned. They have a lot of fear around abandonment, emotional, financial abandonment, all those things. So it is triggering and it is controversial.
If you could have your time again, because you were married, you've been married, haven't you?
Yes, so
Yeah.
I was with my ex-husband from the age of 21 to 34.
21, youngster, hey?
Yeah, we were a youngster. We were only married for 5 years, but we'd been together for, what's that, 13, 14
13
years.
years. So, if you could have your time again, I find marriage forever, like that's obviously, as someone who's recently engaged,
Yeah.
that strikes a chord with me. But also, I kind of look at the system and go, well, if 50%, give or take, depending on what country, are ending in divorce, why is everyone just kind of following the stock standard principles and the stock standard vows, etc.? If you could have your time again, would you change a vow around till death do us part? And what would you potentially say? I'm not throwing a real curveball at you early.
Yeah, that's all right. I think it would be something along the lines of, for as long as I love you and we're aligned.
Mm.
You see, when I met my husband at 21, I did love him. We were aligned. And, you know, he was a perfect match for who I was then. I was I was 21, I was young. I didn't have a strong sense of self or who I was. And he had a very strong sense of self and of direction. He was he was a good looking guy, was a smart guy, and he had a lot of drive. I mean, I graduated university, I had a good job, I had all of these attributes myself, but he had them on a grander scale, you know, as men do. They are energetically, he was bigger than I. And I found that very attractive at the time. And I would suggest that he found where I was at attractive to him too. You know, it was a perfect fit on that front. And that lasted for as long as neither of us changed. But I know, and I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I know for women that women go through very defined periods of life stages. And so as soon as you do have children, you take on a different role. You know, that archetype, you change your archetype just through your own physiology. I mean, the chemical process inside of falling pregnant, and like you don't even mean to. And I believe actually that this even influences the choice of the person that you marry. The biological drive to procreate blinded my eyes to some of the emotional lack of my ex-husband, but actually from a providership to mix my genes with, he was 100% good match. And still is from a fatherly point of view. You know, he's still a very good father to my 2 daughters. But when I grew outside of, you know, I had the children, I did the stay-at-home mum thing for 5 years. I had the Thermomix. I made everything from scratch. I did that archetype and I aced it. Okay. I aced that period of my life. But my brain actually started to get a bit bored. Intellectually, you know, I just started to feel like I needed to do something a little bit more for myself. I wasn't stimulated anymore. And so once my children, I have 2 daughters, once they started going to, you know, 4-year-old kindy and kindergarten and prep, and all of a sudden my time was a little bit my own again, and I could start focusing on myself again. Well, I came out of that cocoon of motherhood a very different woman than the girl I entered into it. Now, my ex-husband had evolved, but not that much. And I think for men, you do evolve, you have to. But women go through a whole different level of evolvement because we have to carry the baby, birth the, like we do all the things. And so we change astronomically as a woman. And so I did. I came out of that bubble of motherhood and I was a very different woman. And I could feel that I just wanted to do something different for myself. And so it started for me at the time was a desire to just feel good in myself again, because I'd given so much to others for that 5 years. And, so I did the thing that we all do. I got back into the gym. I started reading self-help books. And that's when I decided I wanted to maybe do a bit of life coaching and sort of go down that sort of pathway. We kind of always sort of had our fingers in the pie of those little things, but it had been more of my ex-husband's kind of jam. But I sort of threw myself into it. And that was a process that I started for my own growth and to find myself again after having children. But what it did is it changed me into a version of a woman that he didn't like. He liked who I was when he met me. But you see, I wasn't that girl anymore. And so accidentally, just by doing the right things for me, my growth, I became something that all of a sudden was difficult. A challenging that he didn't necessarily want. He didn't need me to change. He liked the way I was. And so I've always offered him grace in that regard because I changed on him. I changed the rules. I changed what I wanted from a partner because I changed. And so that is true for most individuals, that we change and evolve just through life experience. And there is no guarantees as you change and evolve that you're going to find that your partner is still attractive to you and still able to meet your needs, and vice versa. And actually that's been solidified now. So I am 7-8 years past my marriage ending. And actually I have a pretty good relationship with my ex-husband. We're very amicable. But the reason why we divorced remains still very clear. We're very different people. And I even look at his new partner, who is lovely, and he's kind of gone for a shade of the woman I used to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not me looking down or poo-pooing, but that was his type. His type has changed. And actually my type has changed. So if I walked into a bar today and I was single, I wouldn't find my ex-husband's personality and nature attractive at all. And he wouldn't, I don't think, find me attractive either.
Totally resonate with that.
Yeah,
very much so.
And you can't help that if that happens. Because when I chose that for myself at 21, that was the right choice then.
I had a couple, it would have been about 15 years ago. I used to train them because I was in the fitness space. And I remember, I think both of them told me, and it stuck with me for whatever reason. They made a bit of a joke about it, but I can kind of see it based on what you said, in that blokes often don't want their women to change when they first start dating, and women often want their men to change. And it stuck with me all this 15 years on, and just listening to what you said there, I kind of just felt a little bit of that as well.
Now, whether this is like an AI Instagram thing gone wrong, but I believe it's an Albert Einstein quote. Most men come, now Google me on and check me, like fact check me on this one, but I have seen around that men come to a marriage wanting a woman to stay the same, and women come to a marriage hoping a man will change. It's true.
I see that.
Yeah.
Talking of that.
That is conditional love, so clearly we're looking for love that is unconditional. So conditional love of somebody needing to be a certain person to stay a certain way for the love to remain, it puts you very much at risk of outgrowing an individual.
You've used the word outgrown a couple of times, and I know before we started this podcast interview that you mentioned it a bit. Do you see that as a major play in the falling down of relationships? And if so, I'm pretty sure I know where this is going to go, but if so, what is the gender that is most likely going to outgrow the other gender?
So it's typically the female that outgrows the male. And I believe it's because it takes longer for a woman to really step into true self and what she's really looking for and needing from a relationship. And so who we are shapes what we seek out in a partner. And so energetically, most men, or at least the masculine energy in the relationship, it is a big air energy. And so the feminine does fall into the container of the masculine. Depending on the health of a relationship, the feminine can lose herself in that if she's not careful. And I think when we're young, we don't mean to, but we do. And I think this is where physiologically, even the fact that we do become a little bit codependent when we have children. We don't mean to, but you lose yourself in the relationship, you lose yourself for the children. And so it is going to catapult you at some point, or it should, into finding yourself again and no longer living vicariously through your children, because that's not healthy either. And so as a result of that, process, the feminine is more likely to grow. And I think men just have a stronger sense of who they are and where they're going earlier in life.
The biggest fear and challenge that I've experienced from women is the fear of outgrowing their partner or their husband. Is that something that you experience a fair bit in your world as well?
Yeah, so I meet women obviously after or while they're in the process of feeling like they're outgrowing a partner or they have outgrown a partner. And it brings up a lot of guilt and shame. And even actually for the masculine, when they find this happening to them, either sex, it brings up a lot of guilt and shame and fear around that, because often you're outgrowing a partner that's actually not necessarily a bad partner. Sometimes they're actually very good to you, and actually the marriage is, it might not be amazing, but it's a warm enough bath that you wouldn't go and pull the plug out of it just yet.
That's really interesting. I find this fascinating, and obviously this is your world, so I'm really interested in this. So is Australia at about 40% divorce rate? I know America's around 50%. Do you know the latest?
I believe we're up around the 50% mark.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And that's not even accurate, because it only measures those that are divorced, and you have to be separated for at least 12 months before you can file for divorce. So it could actually be larger than that at the point. It's particularly off the back of COVID and all of that sort of done to relationships. Yeah.
So talking of this warm bath,
yes,
based on, say, the 50% that are left, what would be your prediction or estimate as to how many of those are in a really alive, purposeful, fulfilling relationship, not just a warm bath? What would be your prediction?
Well, let me ask you this question, Blake. Of the amount of marriages that are around you in your life today, how many of them would you want for yourself to be in?
This is the proposal that I put to a lot of people in my world who are single. I'm like, you like the idea of marriage, but when you actually observe the marriages in front of you, you actually don't want that. You just like the idea. So my guesstimate would be that 1 in 10 are actually really fulfilled, aligned, and passionate. That would be my guess.
I would suggest that that's about right. And because I am both, my presence to others is both a trigger and an inspiration. So pop me in a social circle and it will soon show up who is actually very happy and comfortable in their marriage. They actually love my work. They think what I do is fabulous. They'll say things like, I just don't understand how people stay in the kinds of marriages that they do. And I realize how lucky I am to have Bob. And, they give me this whole spiel and I can see, oh yeah, you guys are happy. But people that aren't that happy in their marriages, or it's kind of a warm bath where it's not too frigid, not too toxic hot, right? They've got all sorts of things to say to me about their marriage and the turmoil that's going on in their head now, because socially, of course, this line that we tell ourselves about the grass not necessarily being greener. Well, we can kind of look around now, and there is living proof around us that actually that's probably a lie that I'm telling myself to stay in something. And so it is becoming more of a turmoil for that person. And so it's starting to be very easy to pick up now. So yes, 1 in 10, you might be right. Most of us now, we don't believe the social media, facade that many people put on, the highlight reel of their life. We kind of know how that works now. And so we've become very good at discerning. I'm the same as you. If I looked around myself socially, how many marriages around me would I say I want for me? And actually, I would say probably 3 to 4. And actually, they're all on their second marriage. And all of them would say the same thing, like, I wouldn't have been ready for this kind of relationship earlier. Kind of had to go through everything and kind of fuck up and mess up and do all the things I shouldn't have done in that first marriage. And that's prepared me for this second one. And this is the best relationship of my life.
It almost became the theme in my work last year for whatever reason. I'm sure it's no accident. Really, whether it's energetically or looking at the traits, I kind of started to categorize them as either a power couple or a power struggle.
No.
And for me, where I kind of, I guess, dissolved it down to was that sense of a real partnership. And yeah, similar to you, it'd be 1 in 10. I feel really fortunate that my partner and I have been able to call in some of those power couples as best friends, so we see it firsthand what it looks like. And obviously, you don't know what's going on behind, but
yes.
I'm sure you can kind of attest to this. Once you see it enough, you kind of know what you're looking for in terms of the energetics between each other, how they talk about each other in front of each other, how they talk about each other behind each other, like those type of things. So you start to see patterns play out. But for me, and you would experience this firsthand, it's worlds apart, the difference between being in a partnership and having that kind of power struggle. And I've been, obviously I'm in kind of what I would deem a partnership now, and I was in one when I was like 21. And there's just a real sense of unity and that we're on the same team chasing the same dream.
Yeah.
In the other ones, beautiful women of whom I'm friends with, but it just never felt like we're on the same team. We were kind of at war with each other, or there was, power struggles that were playing out. Is there other signs that you can see when it comes to that power couple and that partnership versus power struggle? Like, what are you looking for?
Well, I think at a core, you must be friends. There must be an intellectual connection and similarity, the emotional connection and similarity and attraction, and the physical connection and attraction. You must have all three. And the intellectual part of it forms the hook in many ways that keeps you sort of bouncing off a person. And that, really is a friendship. Combined values, shared core desires in terms of where you see yourself going into the future. And I believe, and I think, I can't remember where I've heard this from, but I believe it to be true also, and I've seen it, is that respect. As soon as you start seeing disrespect in terms of how you are treating your partner or speaking about your partner, even if it's in the shadow. So what I mean by that is you're doing it behind their back and they don't know about it. As soon as there's an element of disrespect in a relationship, then that really is a very quick, slippery slope.
I find respect fascinating. I'll be really interested in your take on it. I found the narrative over the last couple of years really interesting with this, what at least appears through my eyes to be a social narrative that's creating more friction between men and women than before. But what I find really interesting, the piece around respect, is I find myself in two camps, one of which I would never get into a relationship with someone who disrespects me from day one. And what I found really interesting is working with couples to build back the respect that was there initially, but has kind of withered away a little bit. And that often is a byproduct of a bloke lacking integrity between his words and his actions, the people pleasing, the lack of boundaries, the inability to say no, and she just kind of loses respect. And it can be turned around, but it's really interesting from a male point of view, and obviously spending a lot of time with blokes, is consciously or unconsciously that desire for respect. And sometimes they haven't got language for it, but when you bring it to light, they're like, oh, fuck, that's actually what I'm seeking. How do you see that? And I'd be really interested in whether you've joined any dots between women and their lack of respect for men before they even enter the relationship, and the correlation between potentially, one, their relationship with their father, and two, their relationship with their ex-partners, knowing, at least from what I've seen, the projection that can happen from those early stages. So what have you seen come up in your world around respect in and outside the relationship?
So at a core, I mean, yes, the masculine desires and wants to be respected. You know, they do, and they want to be seen in the eyes of respect. The feminine desires to feel and be seen as appreciated. You know, so that's how it presents in, you know, the different polarities. Respect, when it's not present in a relationship over a long period of time, leads to resentment. You know, and so that's the difficult thing when you're working with people who are wanting to save a marriage or work on a marriage, is that sometimes there's been so much water under the bridge for such a long period of time that the respect level is kind of hard to get back to what it should be, because there's just huge amounts of hurt and resentment. And this is where sometimes first marriages fall short, because we often enter them from a place of immaturity. So the feminine or the masculine is not expressing what I'm really feeling inside, what I really think about your behavior. And sometimes it's a complete shutting down of our intuition so that the relationship doesn't end, to ignore certain things that are going on, or even some feelings that, oh, I don't know if this is right for me or not. You know, and so if these sorts of behaviors have started from the start, and that's been the behavior that's allowed the relationship to last, well, often it becomes a predominant behavior of keeping the peace, biting our tongue, ignoring our intuition to stay in it. And over time, you do lose respect for your partner, because it invites in a trove of behaviors on both sides. Both become enablers and co-creators of this mess. But the feminine is very good at pointing the finger. She is. You know, I can say this because I work predominantly with women. The feminine is very good at finding fault in the masculine, and is much slower to find fault in herself. What's that saying? You point one finger at somebody, you point three at you. So actually a lot of my work with the feminine is actually helping her understand the ways in which she invited disrespect in.
That's interesting.
Because,
can you elaborate on that? That's really interesting.
well, if you ignored what you could feel was going on, if you didn't express what you actually did not like, and that means having firm boundaries, that if somebody's continuing to do this, well, why am I staying in the relationship? If you entered the relationship hoping and assuming he would change because now you're married and now you have a baby, or whatever the scenario is, well, then actually what you've done is you've invited in disrespect, and you've sat at the table of disrespect and hoped he would change.
Excellent.
But I mean, the masculine must also own, of course, that if they've entered this relationship and started with behaviors like that, we are inviting the feminine to not respect me over time. Even if I do a very good job, or they believe they're doing a very good job of hiding their behaviors or of controlling her. So by that, I mean emotionally abusing and gaslighting her one day, but then being nice the next moment. You know, if he's playing that dance because he's maybe learned it from his father or whatever learnt behavior, that over a 20 to 25 year period is going to invite disrespect and resentment. And so it is this very interesting dance of, if you find yourself in a marriage later on in life that you actually started for yourself back when you were quite immature, you've now created this melting pot of behaviors and patterns and resentment and shit under the bridge that you can't undo. And now the feminine's saying, I want to feel appreciated. And he's saying, well, I need you to respect me. And she's like, well, no, I don't.
Mm.
You know,
For me, the combination of disrespect and the resentment is often the energetic component that I can see between couples. I'm sure you can kind of see this, where it's just like there's muddy water between the two of you, and you're wondering why you don't want to have sex with each other. You're wondering why the communication keeps breaking down. You wonder why you got such a short fuse towards each other, because there's all this. And that I found that really interesting, and I'm interested to know how you navigate this with your clients. My partner and I started from week one having a weekly check-in every Sunday about our relationship. And for me, there's a number of reasons why that's really successful and worked well for us. And at the top of the list, it's because nothing gets a chance to, the water doesn't get a chance to get dirty, because every 7 days, at the very least, we have an opportunity to talk about what's coming up. Whereas clients or friends, the we need to talk is often a byproduct of build, and then blow. And you're wondering why you have resentment towards each other, or why you're disrespecting each other. But what are you noticing in your world in terms of the cesspit that can form?
well, what I say here, I mean, I don't envy marriage counselors. When you've got a couple coming in and they want to save their marriage, the only thing that's going to save a marriage is complete truth. So a laying down of both parties, of all their cards on the table about what they've really been to, everything that's in the shadow. I don't give a shit about facades anymore or how people present in the world. I care about people's shadow, because that actually shapes what happens in a relationship. And you see, most instances, you're not going to have two people show up to a marriage counselling session and put all of their cards on the table about what they've really been up to, what they've really been thinking, because somebody's going to walk out and that's going to be the end of the marriage. So that's the problem with that scenario, that to heal a marriage or a relationship, for there any chance to be, to clear that muddy water, you've actually got to look at the muddy water and see what's in it. And most people's marriages wouldn't necessarily survive that. So that's the first part of the equation. What was the second part of the question again? Can you remind me?
More like, what do you see mud in the water? We spoke about disrespect and resentment. Those are kind of, when I see the combination of those two, I'm like, fuck, the water's really muddy between the two of you. Is there any other traits or things that you see as common themes that make that water muddier?
Oh, yes. So this is what I was going to touch on. So your relationship with your partner is of a different conscious evolution than my marriage was. And many marriages were when they started 10, 15, 20 years ago. These conversations about checking in with your partner about how you feel and what's going on for you and what do you want to achieve this week, nobody was telling us to do that 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. And so that is very new evolutionary behavior and programming that we're now placing on relationships. And so what we're seeing now is the breaking down of relationships that never had that kind of social programming around relationships when the marriage started. And so you're dealing with the muddy waters of past behavior presenting in the now, and then we're putting on them these conscious evolutionary behaviors that we're doing now that just never applied. And so as soon as you place, how do I feel and your visions for the future on these relationships, they crack, because they were never built on that. They were perhaps built on that old success program and paradigm of the 80s and 90s, which was all about get married, have 3 kids, buy the nice home, get the good job, get a nice car, upgrade. I mean, that was really the carrot that was dangled in front of the masculine. The feminine showed up by cooking many different dishes. And, that was, I look at my mum and what she sort of went through. She followed the social programming about what it looked like to be a good wife. you know, cooking, the beautiful home, the happy kids, you know, and dad did the job too in terms of following his social programming. And so from that version, they were a success, but it didn't bring quality relationship. So what you're doing with your partner is ensuring the quality of the relationship, that, you know, that the mud in the river doesn't grow so dense that you're too afraid to touch it, you know, and so it's different.
So, because you and I had a very brief but interesting chat on socials this week, when it comes to roles, traditional, not so traditional, you know, one of the things that kind of came up this week was around provider. And I was really interested in your comment of women, I mean, we'll expand on it, but women not necessarily being interested in the provider. So what's the most common theme of breakdowns in relationships that you're seeing, and how would you reposition a relationship dynamic when it comes to provider, etc. these days?
Yeah, so I mean, part of the attraction to my ex-husband, because I was desiring to have children when I met him in my early 20s, was that he was going to be a very good provider. You know, it was part of the attraction. It was part of what I was seeking in a partner. And he had many other attributes. I didn't come to him for his money. We were both in our mid-20s, you know, building our financial future. But he had all the attributes of a really good provider. And so most women are going to be seeking that out. They want a partner that can provide and care for them and nurture them while they have children. The difference when you are divorced is that I don't have the luxury of, or no woman or man has the luxury of being able to want a provider, because you're not in a relationship anymore, you know, and the world today means that I have to work and I have to be able to provide for myself, and I have to be able to feel financially secure and abundant. And actually, I would say that most women know that men at this stage of the video game of life, they don't necessarily want to be providing for a partner. You know, you're not looking for somebody that earns as much as you or anything like that, but they, you know, she's got to be able to pay her own bills, be, you know, secure. Otherwise, it starts to feel like you're just dating another teenage girl again. And for many men that were in situations, marriages where they were the provider, it ended up feeling like you were kind of married to a teenage girl.
So interesting.
Yes, it builds a degree of resentment on both sides, because she ends up feeling like, I'm not respected, my views aren't important here, and he's in control of me in the relationship. You know, and he feels resentment because actually he probably does know more than her about finances and all of these things, you know, but he's not being respected for what he knows. And so she's feeling controlled, and, you know, then they've got the whole spectrum of financial abuse and control, and he's just feeling like he's not being respected. And so, or that he's carrying an immature feminine who's got no idea about money. You know, so a man that's divorced, he doesn't necessarily want to come and provide for a woman. And as a feminine, I don't ever want to put myself in a position again where I'm reliant on a man for my providership, because that saw me stuck and trapped in a marriage, believing I couldn't provide for myself. And so how do we cancel out a fear? You know, you prove to yourself that I can financially provide myself. But what it means for men and women in this space that are dating is that what you're coming to desiring from a relationship is different now. I and women want a man who can provide for them emotionally. You know, not save me emotionally, but I want a man that can add benefit to my life, add joy, add happiness, add connection. And for men in this space, that can feel very confronting, because they probably only needed to provide financially and from a security point of view during a marriage. Now, all of a sudden, you know, they're dating women that wanting kind of emotional depth and connection.
This is so juicy. This.
And they're like, what? You know, they've never had to do,
Mm.
never had to talk about my feelings. You know, what
I
I
know.
was enough. And
Mm.
now all of a sudden, you know, this I found that this showed up for me the more money that I made.
Which
So,
bit? Talk to that.
well, because now I didn't need a provider.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And so
Yeah.
for many men that I don't know why, you know, maybe they had a perception that I needed to be saved. You know, I don't talk about my work in my personal life, but, you know, men, I think that they like the idea of being able to come in and save and do certain things for women, which is wonderful. But when I don't need a man for kind of financial saving or security, all that means now is I need you for your depth as a person and who you are. And that's where some men get lost. And actually, I have several friends of mine that are, you know, sort of in the same financial space as me, who would say that their relationships, the dance that's going on in them right now is of the same dynamic. The man is feeling a little bit like, well, what do you need me for if you don't need me for that? You know, it affects a man's sense of self-worth because you do naturally want to provide. You know, I mean, I don't know if you've ever dated a woman that's earned more than you before and that you've not had to provide for.
Yeah, I have. I find this fascinating. Yeah, I have a couple of times. What I find really interesting, and I'm kind of speaking both personally and professionally, is the innate desire to provide.
Yes.
Like it's almost like, you know, when you and I were having that little conversation and you were kind of challenging me a bit on the provider part, I kind of almost thought of it as like to tell a man not to provide is like chopping his balls off.
Yeah. But I mean, for me, I still desire to be provided for, but it's in a different way now.
Yeah, yeah. So
You
this
know,
is where I was going.
yeah,
Because I think to your point, a lot of blokes don't know how to provide in other ways, e.g. emotional support, etc. So they sit in and they hide behind the financial supporting or providing because they don't have the language or they don't have the, you know, that's still a challenge for a lot of guys finding that emotional intelligence. I think
I find it actually like I use the term, for me, it's an energetic providership. Is their energy bigger than my own? Is their sense of self, their direction, their purpose, like their on pointness within themselves?
that's
And
really good.
that naturally, because of the space that I'm in, that naturally means I end up attracted by, or masculine attracted to me, that are energetically more successful or bigger than me. I'm not putting a monetary amount on that, but it's just energetically. I can sit in their energy and their energy is bigger than my own. And when I sit in that space, then actually I can be my full self. I don't have to dim or diminish or not mention any of my successes or any of the things that I've got going on for me, because they're fully confident energetically in who they are, where they're going and what they're doing. So for me, I see it as an energetic container rather than a monetary one. But the monetariness still comes with it because they are showing up in life at a certain level as a result of their energy. I hope I've...
No, it's really it's a fascinating thought. I even think, again, if I use myself as an example in this, there's a difference for a lot of guys in being the provider in that energetic partnership and being a provider in one that isn't, but they feel obligated to, or they're meant to, or they should to. You know, like there's a significant difference in terms of the energetics behind someone who wants to be the provider because they want to, and the person who wants to be a provider or is a provider because they have to, they're meant to, they should, they're better.
Well, at this stage, you know, if I use myself as an example here, The only love that stays in my life now, and vice versa, it's because I love you for you, not for what you do for me. You see, many marriages, a person is loved for what you do for them,
100%.
not necessarily who you are. So, I love you for you, not for what you do. I would want that feeling towards them, and I would want them to have that feeling for me.
That would be really challenging when I think about what I know about you, but just overall, that would be really challenging for a guy to sit with, because my guess is that with your kind of skills and emotional intelligence, he'd feel seen beyond his identity of a provider and potentially feel less than in terms of emotional intelligence with you, and not sure of his, I guess, status without the identity of a provider. So that would be very, my guess is that a lot of blokes would feel exposed by what you just said, albeit it's almost like...
Well, they feel very triggered because most men would probably not resonate with feeling like somebody just loved them for them.
That's where I was
Whether
going to
you are poor or broke.
It's almost like a double-edged sword of them feeling exposed. It's like being seen. It's the best thing and the most daunting thing at the same time.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Because like I said to you, I'm still, I'm still drawn to that successful man, because the energetics of that, that's where we have intellectual connection in terms of what we're doing. But it is still, even if they are a success on their own terms, when you love a man for who they are, not for what they do, it is. And they do say that the feminine is what really makes the masculine step into their full divinity, because she makes them feel very seen outside of what you are doing in the matrix in terms of that success pathway. I mean, that's divine masculine, isn't it? It's not just the successful masculine with the big watch and the nice car and the fancy house and the, that sort of stuff.
Well, I think, again, using myself as an example, when there's a real purity in the feminine, I don't think there's anything more inspiring. Like, when I think about Shani, she doesn't have to do anything in order to elicit like this deep, primal, evolutionary motivation within me. It's just her being.
Yes.
And that's...
Well, the divine feminine is the catalyst for the masculine to be the best version of self. Feminine, actually, that inspires the masculine.
100%.
Yeah.
But I think there's a big difference between, coming back to our points earlier, between a really clean energetics of a feminine and...
I should say here, the feminine, when she is in her feminine and she is in that
100%.
whole space, when the feminine is in that space, she's in the space to be able to attract a masculine man who actually, even if he doesn't want to initially, she ends up being a catalyst for growth that he probably didn't want to have, but he ends up doing it anyway, just through her mere energy in his vortex. That's the power of the feminine when she's in, on point within herself and balance. Totally.
What's a trait that you see that shifts between, say, a feminine's first marriage and their second? So they might have wanted a certain trait or a certain kind of guy in their first marriage. And in the breakdown of that, what are they looking for differently, say, second time round?
Well, it goes back to a little bit the point that I said before. I mean, the first marriage, women, without meaning to, tend to be seeking out a partner that is a great match to have children with. So from a providership point of view, I feel safe here kind of point of view, and also from genetic mixing of who you're going to have children with. And from that point of view, I did that. I chose a very good husband to have my children with. But when you're no longer desiring to have children anymore, And you may want to live with somebody in time, but you're not looking to necessarily move in with them straight away. Well, all of a sudden you are looking for emotional connection and depth and intellectual connection and depth. I mean, you can find physical connection and attraction easily, but doesn't mean a relationship is going to last. So it's the intellectual and emotional connection and attraction that is going to keep you coming back to a person. And this is where, you know, I use that sort of term of actually being stuck on a person rather than stuck with. You know, what is going to keep you stuck on a person? Whereas most marriages survive and last because they're kind of stuck with. It's a very different dynamic. And so in that space, it's the emotional connection, an emotional and an intellectual connection that will keep a relationship and attract you into the next relationship. And of course, that then means that we must become emotionally deeper and more connected with ourselves so that we can emotionally connect with another. And also that intellectual depth. You know, do you have your own life going on? Do you actually have something to talk about when you meet somebody? What's the hook that you can bring to the conversation with people? What's going on in your own life that is of interest and inspiration to others? This becomes the kind of meat that we are looking for in relationships now, when you know you don't want to have any more children with with anybody.
How many women in your world, so if we go back to the ratio, I'm guessing it's potentially around the one out of 10, but how many women in your world are, you know, if we're kind of talking second marriages or second relationships, would be emotionally satisfied with their relationship?
Yes, a lot more. And the interesting thing actually is that it doesn't come down to looks so much anymore. It's something to talk about actually just recently with one of my close girlfriends that, you know, she finds her current partner very attractive, but, you know, he's not necessarily somebody that she would have gone for in the past. But he brings so many other things to the table that she's, you know, still very attracted to him and they're very happily in a relationship. So it's not the person she would have gone for in her 20s physically to look at in many ways. And so, yes, the emotional connection in the second relationships, when the individual has done some work on themselves, yes, it's much deeper often than the one that they had with their actual ex-husband, ex-wife even. But they also tend to physically look like they wouldn't have predicted for themselves to.
Where do you draw the line between I'd love a formula, actually. Maybe it's just a case of workshopping it. I don't know if you've got a formula on hand, but I find it really interesting between this dance between couples that should just part ways and how much easier that might be these days than, you know, say it was however many decades ago, but also some couples that actually need to put in some fucking work and bring the relationship to life instead of just tapping out. Do you have like a kind of check boxes to what it looks like to put in work and actually, you know, work required for a long-term relationship and when is actually the time to tap out?
There's no rules on when it is time to tap out, or there's no rule on when you should stay or how much time you should give it. It's always different in every scenario. And the reason why is because there are two individuals involved. So you might desire to grow and change and actually do the real work to improve a relationship and marriage. But it doesn't mean that your partner is going to have the equal desire or investment to change and to continue doing the work past just saying they want to, or even just doing it for a few months before they slide back into their old patterns again. You know, it's two people that have to equally want to do the work and to continue to show up in a different way than is their comfort zone of the past. And that is where things can fall short, because you end up with one that wants to do more of the work and is more invested in growing, and typically one that doesn't grow in the same. So even if they start off well-intentioned, one tends to kind of grow more. And it becomes a bit like pushing porridge up a hill. It's very, I mean, we all know how hard it is to grow and do the work on ourselves and to change. You know, you really have to want that. And you've got to want it every day. You can't force somebody to do that. You can't force someone to want that for themselves. And so if that happens, then whether you give it a month or you give it 12 months or 18 months, you're going to find that not much changes, because if anything, the gap is going to grow, because that individual will just grow and blossom and continue to change, and they'll be trying to drag somebody along with them. And so that's been my experience, that it's always one leading the desire for change and growth, and it's not necessarily equally desired from the other person. And as soon as you see that and you start to see that gap growing and somebody starting to blossom and take flight, resentment grows, disrespect grows, you know, you get the whole pathway. And then so organically, and so really it comes down to a person's individual choice of how long do I need to give it before I'm comfortable to call it that we are two very different people now. Or somebody ends up meeting somebody else because they've grown and changed and they're not getting their needs met. And so without meaning to, they meet somebody else and that becomes a catalyst for the marriage ending. Or it just becomes very toxic because of the amount of disrespect and resentment on both sides. And so so it depends, you know, there's no right or wrong answer there.
I don't know in your world how this sits, but I still am very confused in amongst society how couples can feel confident in the other person if there's not a level of dedication towards the work. Like I don't understand how they look forward to their future and go, okay, my partner doesn't do the work now. At some stage, we're going to be met with some challenges.
Yeah.
Like it has to be a level of delusional denial, I think, doesn't it? Like one of the things that makes me most confident about my relationship is because I have evidence of how much work my partner's prepared to put in. So I look at the future and go, we're going to come up against some hurdles, no doubt. But looking at the evidence of the last 4 years, I feel very confident in the partnership that we've got and in her that the work will be done that's required at that time.
But I mean, this is a new mindset. You know, we didn't enter in that to those sorts of relationships with that kind of mindset in the past. And, you know, if you look in the 80s and 90s, generally the feminine was encouraged and it was almost seen as a success if she was able to stay home and be more codependent and just raise the children. Well, I mean, to be honest, and, you know, people might not agree with me here, but it's not actually a growth environment for the feminine to grow children and focus. And so there's nothing wrong. It's a stage of life that the feminine goes through, but it doesn't necessarily grow and evolve her into being her truest, fullest self, you know. And so it can actually take away from herself, which is why women kind of go on that whole finding myself journey again after the kids sort of return to school or whatever it might be. So that is one element, that it's just your stage of the video game is where this is normal. And it wasn't for me to even see that. But I'm with you. I mean, I would never be in a relationship now with somebody that wasn't growth orientated.
I don't understand it.
I'm so growth orientated that I couldn't listen to somebody complain and moan about their existence and not grow themselves out of it. You know, I don't do victim mindset in my own life. So I'm not going to enable or listen to somebody else doing that. And that's not even just for intimate relationships. That's all of my relationships, where I have all of my friendships would be of that level now, because I'm so growth orientated. I see myself as the creator of my own universe and lifestyle. And so, but not everybody looks at life like that, you know, and so it's learning to pick out of the pond who is actually of that mindset now, the new programming, as I would call it, and who in the pond is fully enmeshed in the old programming and doesn't want to change, you know, and then choose your person and your people accordingly.
This has been fascinating. I actually think at some stage I'd love to get you back on for a second edition. For those that want to find out more about you and the work that you do, where's the best spot to send them?
Yes, so I'm on Instagram at Carla Da Costa Coach, or my website, which is carladacosta.com.
Beautiful. Carla, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.